Welcome to Royal Education. My name is Mr. O, and today I'm going to be doing a series called Talk EDU. So I'm going to put the name of this talk right here and explain what the purpose of this talk is. So in these talks, I'm going to be focusing a lot about the common questions that college counseling students have. So a lot of times there's a lot of mysteries and different things that students don't understand about the college process, particularly in the United States. And today I'm going to be addressing a lot of the common questions that students have in order to help you guys understand what, sort of the process is like and what sort of stuff do you need to be aware of in order to make it easier for you all to sort of transition into the college process. And so I'm going to be addressing a lot of the common questions that I originally got through Reddit. Students asked some questions here and there, and so I thought, why not make a video based on it? And so before I go ahead and do so, here are my general credentials that, about my background, what I do, and so on. Be aware that when I'm doing these discussions and I'm talking about, different perspectives, some of it is really grounded in facts. Just from my personal experience being a college counselor for many years, along with my personal experience going through the college process and graduate school process, along with the fact that some of it is going to be a bit opinionated, so don't believe 100% things as, you take it sort of with a grain of salt sort of thing. But this is what I personally believe. And that being stated, I also want to make it clear that this does not automatically, state that automatically you don't need a college counselor, that these things will 100% address everything. There's a lot of little nuances that exist in the college application process. And whenever you need like sort of professional help and so on, we do also provide that at Royal Education. But that being stated, we're going to go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be covering another topic that a lot of students have, been asking me questions around. And it's a topic around extracurriculars. And so in this topic, I'm going to be covering particularly a specific questions, 5 questions again, that students have been asking me about. So the first question I'm going to be covering is around the idea of what's more important. Extracurriculars, so I'm going to put EC for extracurriculars, or academics. So that is the first question I will be covering for today. The second question I'm going to be covering about is it do ECs make or break the application? The college application in particular. So is extracurriculars, is that important to the point where it could change your decision and so on? The third thing is tips for acquiring good ECs. So that will be the third topic I'll be covering for today. The fourth topic that I'll be covering is how do you strengthen STEM ECs. Now I want to clarify that by saying STEM being, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. If you're like in that domain, how do we strengthen your profile, particularly if you're in this type of field? Along with the fifth one, then being strengthen non-STEM ECs. So usually non-STEM is referencing to liberal art-based, individuals. So how do we strengthen individuals in that category? And so these are the main questions that I'll be covering for today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the first question that I have posed for today, which is, what's more important? Extracurriculars, ECs, or academics? And it's a very good question. That being stated, when it usually is the scenario for college applications, the priority, I'm going to say, is academics. But that doesn't mean at all that if, let's say, you have some weaknesses in your academic background, that suddenly you're doomed. That is a complete lie. I will also state, though, on the flip side of things is that, let's say for example you have amazing extracurriculars, like you somehow did, you're top of like a leader for an organization, or you made huge amount of money through a business and so on, but then you have a lot of bad grades, like you're failing classes left and right and so on. If that is the scenario, then most likely, one, you don't need to go to college at certain points because you're making so much money or you're doing so amazingly that you don't need a college degree. But on top of it too, if you have that bad of grades, most likely you won't be successful in college regardless. And so a lot of schools will not accept you because that's too much of a risk on their numbers for retention rates and so on. But on top of it, it's just not worth it for them in the very end of the day, because for them, they want to have students that actually benefit from the programs that they provide and that will be successful in their programs, and so will feel grateful for what they gain from the particular college, their courses, their extracurriculars that are available, and so on. And so I want to make it clear that when you're trying to make the decision, of course, the obvious answer will be that you want to have both strong. You want to be amazing, like one of the top students, or if not, doing strongly in academics, while still doing amazingly in extracurriculars. But there is no true answer to this, because in the very end of the day, I have seen students myself who, were definitely a little bit weaker in academics. Like they didn't do too well on certain, classes because, let's say, they're not a math person, or they're not an English person, or they're not a history person, and so it shows at times. But that being stated, sometimes their extracurriculars are so strong that colleges cannot ignore them, especially if they won like national competitions, they prove themselves in different ways. That really lends itself to the idea that, hey, maybe the student's not strong in, history, for example, but this student's so amazing in science that we have to consider this student. And so at times extracurriculars could really define the application, but the default answer for me is that still do your best in academics, still make sure you take a lot of difficult classes, college courses, AP courses, IB courses, and prove yourself in that side, but at the same time still keep up with extracurriculars to your best capacity. And only really commit to the extracurricular if you know you could be the best or one of the best, or prove it that you love what you're doing, and that it really becomes a part of your identity of who you are, and it's very clear on the application. So I wanted to make that clear. There's no clear answer which was more important, but that being stated, still have a baseline, strength in academics. That is for certain most important. That will ensure that you could get at least into some colleges. Then, of course, extracurriculars are sort of like the cherry on top, as I would say. Okay. So then following this question is a question: do ECs, extracurriculars, make or break applications? And to be very honest with you, extracurriculars won't per se break your chances completely. But that being stated, especially in the United States, colleges in the United States emphasize the importance about extracurriculars because it shows, one, whether or not you know what you want to do in the future in your life, right? Because if you have done a lot of extracurriculars here and there, or you did certain things, you show a lot more maturity, you gain more maturity through this type of work. And on top of it, it shows who you are as an individual and the work that you have achieved along the way. So in the end of the day, I have seen some students with really weak extracurriculars, like they only have 1 or 2 clubs at most. They didn't do too much, etc. But they still get into these top universities. That does really do happen. And the reason why most of the times is their academic is so strong that the school can't ignore them completely. But that being stated, it's not it makes it harder for you to get into these upper tier schools because after a point they do want you to have experience, or they want to see you have that intellectual vitality or curiosity to further pursue your interests outside of the domain of a classroom. And so, in the end, if you're looking at these top universities, like I'm saying like the Ivy Leagues, I'm saying like these other top liberal arts schools, I'm talking about these schools that have like 10%, 15% acceptance rate, yes, it could break your application if you really don't have any extracurriculars. Because in the very end of the day, there are a good number of students that are really strong academic performers already as it is, but there are those that do really strong academically and do really strong extracurricularly. And there are those like that don't get into these top schools either ways. And so it makes you at a very big disadvantage if you don't have extracurriculars to back you up or to prove that, hey, you deserve to be at that school. And so make sure if you have the chance to really build this type of, background, because it doesn't hurt you in the end of the day. And so I'll go ahead and talk about the next part, because this question sort of really links to the next question that I'm going to be covering. And the next question is going to be about tips for acquiring good extracurriculars. So a lot of times when I was working with students in college counseling and I'm working through their applications and so on, I do hear sometimes, and this is including in forums like Reddit and College Confidential, I do see a lot of times students mention things like, oh, like it's sort of unfair because there's no good extracurriculars around me. I live sort of in the boonies. I live sort of in these areas like rural areas, and so there's no way for me to build my extracurriculars. That's sort of unfair. And I'm gonna say, one, in a way, yes, it is unfair for you and you are pitted, sort of in a disadvantage, but these top universities and a lot of the higher tier universities don't take that, as a reasonable enough excuse. And I've seen a good number of these, students from these really isolated areas that still make a name for themselves and do really amazingly. And when they really stand out, that's how they make themselves, come out to these colleges, and these colleges really want them, because a lot of times the extracurriculars, yes, part of it is being resourceful. And what I mean by being resourceful is that looking at the clubs at your school, looking at things around community organizations, looking at different things like hospitals, different infrastructures do help make the transition easier for you to gain a bunch of these extracurriculars. And so in that sense, I do agree that if you live in a city or live in a very populated area, yes, it does make it easier for you. But that being stated, it's not good enough of a reason for you to not have extracurriculars. And I'm going to explain to you why. If you are in an isolated area and so on, there's a lot of things you could self-initiate. If there's an issue in your area, you could definitely do your own thing. If you are, a person who's very influential or loves what you're doing and you know it, then make it for yourself. Like, make your own business, make your own YouTube channel, make your own things that will support your extracurriculars. So tips for acquiring good extracurriculars in the very end of the day is a mix of factors. If you are born with a little bit more privilege than other people and you have connections to good businesses and so on, that's one way to build it up. Another way is to start early on. So not just high school, but even in middle school or elementary school. If you start your own business, you start your own brand, you start your own thing that you're really into, sometimes at times you could build a very strong brand for yourself. That's another way. I've seen other students, apply to a lot of opportunities here and there and really push themselves and make it a name. So what I mean by that is that, for example, if you just join clubs like Junior State of America or Key Club or a lot of these other, common, clubs that exist in these high schools, that doesn't do anything for you in the very end of the day if you're just a member. So a lot of times it requires you to put a lot of hard work. It requires you to be dedicated to that, that cause. It requires you to develop the skills necessary so that you could get these strong extracurriculars. And so in the very end of the day, there is no real shortcut if you really want to get a brand name. Like, for example, being governor of JSA, being a top position executive in another company and like a younger company or organization, or doing certain things like that. In the very end of the day, it's really up to you to really define your profile and to not make really excuses or, let those sort of reasons hold you back. Because in the very end of the day, when you're at these top universities or you're going to these schools, they want you to be the next leader. They want you to be the next speaker. They want you to be the next head of NGOs and so on. And so make sure you're aware that this is not just something you take lightly, that you actually do have to develop, in order to prove yourself to these colleges that you deserve to be there. And so that concludes my, third question. But now I'm going to focus on the next questions, and I'm going to go ahead and switch papers here. So the next part I'm going to talk about is the fourth question I mentioned, which is to strengthen STEM extracurriculars. So as I mentioned before, STEM is like the sciences, technology, engineering, mathematics type extracurriculars. How do you strengthen that? Well, most of the times from what I've seen, a lot of people do stuff like Science Bowl. They do stuff like Quiz Bowl. They do stuff like that are very relevant to the STEM field. They do robotics competitions and so on. A lot of times, to order to get into these upper tier schools like MIT or Caltech, particularly for these STEM sort of extracurriculars, they want people who show that intellectual vitality, that curiosity for the world, to apply that curiosity to real life scenarios. So some ways you could get strong extracurriculars are through, things like research. So researching through a university. Even though it's not easy to get that type of positions, it is still feasible to get those type of positions along the way. Or rather than that, becoming like, the Science Bowl captain. You compete in big competitions like for Intel and so on. These big brand names will help strengthen your STEM extracurricular background and show that, hey, I am very capable, but I'm also very curious and I want to learn more about the sciences, about mathematics and so on. And so building a strong STEM extracurriculars is really grounded on your intellectual interest and being very competitive to prove that you are one of the best. And so in that sense, there are a lot of other ways, small ways here and there, like having your own business that's relevant in this field and so on. But a lot of times they do want people who are very intellectually curious and push themselves to really understand the world. And so that's how you would strengthen your extracurriculars for specifically the STEM. That being stated, in the end of the day, when it comes to any of these extracurriculars, a lot of times is relative based on where you are located, in the city you are in, and so on. So be aware that, the answer is different for each person. And so make sure you do your own research or even seek help, professional help along the way. Like here at Royal Education, we do that sort of work too. So feel free to let us know if you ever need that sort of help, because that's one of our services. And in the end, the last thing I want to talk about today is how do you strengthen non-STEM extracurriculars. And this is liberal arts-based ones. So what I mean by that is stuff that are not math, science, and so on. This could be, political science. This could be people in Englishes, in music, in the arts, whatever not. And if you're especially looking at universities, particularly that are academic based, the way you strengthen it is by getting a lot of leadership positions. So, becoming president of Junior State of America, if I mentioned, becoming president or becoming a governor for Key Club, doing a lot of these different extracurriculars, or even research at times do exist in the liberal arts too. I've seen other people do stuff like run their own business in the arts. Some people, become authors and write their own stories and so on. Or even participate in some competitions. Even though it's not as common in the non-STEM field, there are still competitions that do exist in debate, for example, or even in like writing, like the NaNoWriMo sort of competitions. Those sort of things will help bolster your application too. And so in the end of the day, it's really about showing this very tangent evidence that you really are passionate or interested in the field. In the end of the day, when you're applying to these colleges, when you apply to the major, doesn't mean at all you have to commit for many of the times, but that's really dependent on school you apply to. But, that's really dependent on what you want to do. And if you're uncertain, keep exploring. Keep doing a lot of things. Push yourself until you find out what you love doing and really put 100% into it. Or even do things that maybe you're not 100% certain about doing, but you enjoy it. Then do it. It doesn't hurt you in the very end of the day. And, you show colleges that you have that work ethic and that ability to prove to them that you deserve to be at their school. And so that concludes my video for today. Thank you so much. Please do subscribe below since I'll be making more videos like this. If you have more questions about extracurriculars, like stuff that I didn't cover on this video, or even other topics, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll make sure to make, videos like this or more parts of videos like this that will cover more in depth about certain questions that you have. And I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.